I wasn't really focused even on work in those first couple of months going back to work. I just was ruminating on, what was happening at home, sort of what happened the night before, just all those negative sort of feelings. And, there'd be often times where people would sort of say to me, oh, David, like try and get my attention. And I just kind of, sort of have to snap myself out of a thought and sort of try and focus again.
So you just couldn't be present?
I couldn't be present.
That's Dave Edwards. He's a father of two who's really struggled with postnatal depression. Dave was rattled from the moment his now 8-year-old son was born. He soon developed anxiety and depression as the pressure and reality of being a father hit home. Putting on a brave face for his partner, Dave was ashamed to share how he was really feeling. He's not alone. Around 5% of new dads develop postnatal depression in their child's first year of life. You don't hear much on the topic, and that's why we're talking about it. Welcome to Young Blood, an award-winning podcast on a mission to make the mental health of young men a top priority. My name's Callum McPherson, I'm a journalist, and this is our platform to open up and share stories of what we've been through because we're not alone. Let's do it. Before we kick this off, I just want to say thanks so much to everyone who's taken 15 to 90 seconds out of their day to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. It boosts us up the ranks massively and makes a huge difference to how many people we can reach with these potentially life-saving stories. So thank you. And for those who haven't got around to it, please, if Young Blood has delivered you some value, let us know on there. Cheers, legends. Trigger warning, if you find anything spoken about in today's episode distressing, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14. Dave, let's start with the moment that you found out you were going to be a father. What was that like?
Oh, certainly the moment that I knew I was going to be a father. I was actually on a boys' weekend at the time, and I came home and my wife kept texting me going, I need something to tell you urgently. When are you going to be home? And so, I just ended up...
That must have freaked you out a bit.
It did a little bit. I was thinking, what kind of conversation will this be?
Yeah.
And I got home and she's like, I'm late. And I've taken a test and I'm pregnant. And just that initial shock, I was like, oh my goodness, like how long have you known? And she's like, oh, just today. Yeah, that was very surreal. Just that feeling of, oh, wow, I know my life is going to change, but I just wasn't expecting, I guess, that sort of news at that time.
Were you feeling positive about it at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. Nervous, but very positive because we had been trying, so it was good. It was validating news, I guess, that that we were successful, I guess, and just a very proud time at that time. So yeah.
And what about during the pregnancy? What was your feeling throughout that time, and the same for your partner?
It was really just a time of going relatively smoothly for us. It wasn't sort of until the latter stages of the pregnancy that my wife started getting some kicking and some back pain, but the pregnancy was pretty smooth. I had built up some expectations as to how things were going to happen from then onwards, and looking back now, I can see why I felt that way, because everything leading up to the birth was pretty straightforward. So
what were your expectations?
So I guess I sort of went in sort of expecting probably that, without having a lot of friends, my age. We were sort of the first in our friendship group to have kids. So I sort of had this sort of idea that, that we'd have a natural birth and, kind of like the Hollywood movies, it'll all be exciting and be able to hold our baby together and take a selfie and, be really excited. But certainly that wasn't the experience.
And what about going further than that? What did you envision fatherhood was going to be like?
I guess because I had a stable father growing up, I really felt like, I guess, just fulfilling that sort of loving and supportive fatherly relationship. I went into, I guess, the birth feeling quite confident given my own childhood experience. So as I said, it was a fairly, I felt really confident sort of going into it, and being sort of a young professional, I thought I could just sort of utilize that sort of confidence in, providing for my partner. And I think sort of in those early stages, I really felt like my experience really was around just providing support to my partner. And that was kind of my role, what I felt was my role at that time. So it was soon to be challenged. Yeah.
How nervous were you about the fact that your life was going to change forever, because I haven't had a child myself yet, but that's that 9-month period of the pregnancy. That's a long time to think about it and to have it slowly progress to that point. So in your own mind, were you thinking, I can't wait for this to happen? Or did you go through phases of thinking, I'm not ready for this yet?
Yeah, I think for me, it was really just that experience of what do I, what do I need to know? So, planning, I think it was just planning for my wife's water broke, what that planned trip would be like. And I did attend antenatal classes, but yeah, it was really focused on my experience at that time was it was really focused on providing support to mums prior to the birth. Probably in during those classes, I guess the message I received, I don't know about the other guys in the class, but the message I received at the time was, you just got to be there to support your partner. So I think sort of leading up to it, because obviously I didn't have a frame of reference, didn't have any other sort of friends to kind of talk to about, I guess, that transition. I just sort of expected that I just get it. Like you'd sort of have that moment, at the birth, and things would just naturally make sense following that time. So I think I was probably going into it in hindsight a little bit naive, but yeah, that was just my experience.
And the attitude that fathers are sort of an afterthought and it's all about the woman giving birth, and the society's attitude seemingly has always been that men are supposed to, as you said, just be supportive and shut up, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And really, I mean, that was the theme of the antenatal class was, you've got your partner there and your partner's job. And I think in from a birth context, I think that makes sense that you are the supporting partner. So you need to support your birthing partner. Yeah, I think that was kind of the sense that I just needed to kind of, get on with things and just be that support.
But it's sort of like the man's supposed to be that real rock and nothing's meant to phase you. And stereotypically, sometimes your partner's having a really hard time and you're just almost emotionless in your capacity to be able to let that be water washing over a rock and take that all on. And that's actually quite a lot of pressure for men to be under, but don't you dare say that because you're not the one giving birth.
And that's such a good point, because I feel like, that was kind of my experience was I just didn't feel entitled, like it was my role was simple in my mind. It was simple. And I just needed to kind of get on with things and, not complain or whinge, because in my mind, my wife was going through such a physically trying and emotionally trying time that I didn't feel like I had the either the permission or just not feeling like my perspective was as valuable, I guess. So yeah.
Take us through the moment that your son was born.
Found out sort of 10 hours after an intense labour that my wife wasn't able to deliver the baby naturally. So we ended up going through an emergency C-section. And at that time, I remember getting that news at the time, and it was just really, unexpected and shocking, because my partner had worked so hard over 10 hours to find out, well, actually, no, this is not the end. Really, this is kind of the middle part of your delivery experience. So I just remembered feeling really powerless and helpless in that time. And that sort of, in hindsight, that was really the sort of the experience that probably first led me to feel that feeling of, well, my expectations, this hasn't gone to script, and for me, because I felt helpless, I felt like I wasn't doing my job as well. And it was made harder because I felt like I was kind of shunted off. Basically, once the obstetrician made the call that it was going to be delivered by a C-section, it was like, well, you stand over here while we sort of, we deal with this. And I really did feel for my partner at the time. And in hindsight, I think that's probably when my anxiety had started to increase quite substantially. And so we basically I got taken into a separate room to get gowned up and ready. And my partner was given an epidural and prepped for the C-section delivery. And sort of in that time, it was just, really just not going to plan. And I was really worried, the worry really started kicking in, going, not only, it hasn't it gone to script, but I'm actually now worried about my partner. So yeah, that sort of worry started to kick in. And basically the birth was my partner, having a reaction to the epidural, and was really just quite a surreal experience, because not only was she sort of not able to really enjoy that first moment that Bub was delivered, but it also resulted in a screaming baby being brought into my hands. So I felt so conflicted. I felt happy, but really worried and stressed at the same time. It was such a weird feeling. It was almost like an out-of-body experience. It didn't feel like it was real, just what I'd sort of built up in my head processed to be. It just wasn't, it didn't pan out that way. So,
and did you extrapolate from that first moment not going to plan? Did your mind race ahead to, well, what if none of the rest of it goes to plan either?
It's a great question. I think for me, it was really just a time for, I guess, taking stock. I think what I'd sort of learnt as a young guy was that, you might be exposed to times of stress, but basically just to calm down and, sort of just do your best in that moment. And I tried to do that. But I guess over time, as our baby continued to cry and scream, and it was unrelenting, it was over a period of time that, I started wondering actually, whether I was the father that I needed to be. And a lot of that sort of doubt and guilt started to build up progressively over the next few months.
What was your mentality going in those first few weeks or months as a dad? How did you see your role, and what was your inner dialogue like with yourself around being a father?
Because we ended up finding out that our bub had reflux symptoms. I feel for me it was really during that time that I ended up just feeling really overwhelmed. The experience was compounded because we were having lots of sleepless nights. Bub was just really unsettled. We'd get midwife support. So we had midwife support for the week in hospital, and we had midwife support outside. And, they would provide us with advice, but we never really felt like the advice was really working. So I think, I started to internalise at that stage and started wondering, well, maybe they're right and I'm the problem. I'm not, I'm not being able to support my wife during, these really important days after recovering from such an invasive surgery. And just started to doubt at that point. The other thing that was compounding it too was I didn't really feel, because I guess of the screaming and the unsettledness, I didn't really feel like I connected with Bub when he first was born. And that was challenging as well.
And I think a bit of a common experience that it can take longer for fathers to feel connected to their newborn than mothers, just because the child so much relies on the mother in those initial stages of being alive.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think I know that now, but I think that was something that I just assumed would happen naturally. We'd have that sort of Hollywood image, selfie sort of portrait when Bob was born, and then I would just naturally learn to have that sort of connection. I think for me, that's what I've learned around expectations. You've got to be really careful with what expectations you sort of come into, fatherhood or parenthood with, because it's you're going to be challenged.
So in regards to setting those expectations, you mean depending on what expectations that you set, you might quickly view yourself as a failure when the reality doesn't live up to that, and then you reflect on yourself as being the problem? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think just generally as guys, that sort of sense of, the danger that we can fall into when we sort of live by a, she'll be right sort of attitude, when we're often used to trying to find quick fixes, and I would try different techniques, try and be really confident with trying to settle Bub, and then just finding out really quickly that those things that I thought I could handle just were in some respects out of my control. I think that sort of led, to me internalizing, that self-guilt. And I think that's that's the danger, is that, yeah, we can internalize, and it becomes often much, much bigger in our heads, in a short space of time, and can become quite dangerous as well.
How was your partner feeling about it all from the beginning and after she recovered from the C-section?
Oh, I think she was just as challenged as I was. Yeah, obviously, it was something that, in truth, I don't think that I spoke a lot to my partner about even her experience or how she was feeling. I think I was just getting frustrated because I felt like I wasn't living up to the expectations of myself, and yeah, just wasn't perceiving that because of the issues we're having with Bub, that it was my fault. So I was quite selfish in sort of my thinking as well. Yeah, I think in saying that, I think that that's one of the lessons that I learned was, if you're not looking after yourself, how can you expect to look after others that are reliant on you?
Were you avoiding that communication with your wife in talking about how it was all going because you had those feelings of inadequacy and you were afraid that those conversations would lead to you having to admit that?
I wanted to come with answers, and I wanted to give, some answers, but I didn't have the answers. And then I thought, well, who are you? You haven't gone through this experience. You had a simple job to do. Just those really negative sort of thoughts around, well, I guess that demon on my shoulder just sort of saying to me, you're not good enough, and yeah, you're just struggling. So don't sort of place your issues, on your partner, because she's already going through enough. She doesn't need to hear.
Yeah. So rather than talk through it with them and have that be something that would help both of you, you saw it as you just be burdening her further, and it would be part of you failing as a man and a father to do that. And so you should just internalize it, and I suppose feel ashamed that you were even thinking those things or feeling those feelings at all in the first place.
Absolutely.
And meanwhile, your partner, how did she express the way that she was feeling? Like, could you tell that it wasn't living up to what her expectations were, or did she seem like she was fairly happy?
I think she was desperately trying to find answers. I think, and one of the things I love about her is she's extremely practical. So she never sort of gives up on trying to find practical solutions to things. She was obviously struggling, but what I sort of, in hindsight, have considered is that she's probably struggling in different ways. And had I guess, been vulnerable at that time and sort of opened up to her, she might have disclosed how she was feeling too. I think that there was a little bit of a disconnect, just because we're sort of surviving in that survival mode of just trying to coordinate sleep for both of us, just basically trying to survive without a lot of sleep. So yeah.
What did it do?
We're getting about 2 to 3. I'm sorry.
No, you're right.
We're getting about 2 to 3. Yeah, 2 to 3 hours sleep a night in those first few months.
Okay, yeah, that's not going to cut it. What did that do to impact your relationship, that lack of communication and the pressure that you were both feeling? How did that impact your relationship with each other?
I think I just ended up distancing myself, I went back to work 5 weeks after, and I think I had built up in my mind these feelings of guilt and inadequacy, to the point where I wasn't really focused even on work in those first couple of months going back to work. I just was ruminating on, what was happening at home, sort of what happened the night before, just all those negative sort of feelings. And, there'd be often times where people would sort of say to me, oh, David, like, try and get my attention. And I just kind of, sort of have to snap myself out of a thought and try and focus again.
So you just couldn't be present.
I couldn't be present, yeah. And I did. I felt like going back to work, I was being sort of teared away from being in a position where I potentially could help the situation at home. And then sort of on the other side of it, at the end of the day, I would be really nervous about going home because I didn't know, what I'd be going home to and whether I could cope with it. And there'd be a number of times where I'd just sit in the car, like I'd catch the train into work, and I'd sort of get back to the car, after the train commute, and I'd just sit in the car and just think, what am I going to do? And I think, had I known that there were, services like the Gidget Foundation, I think I wouldn't have hesitated, contacting them. I think in those early days, I didn't realise that there were services for dads, let alone postnatal depression, anxiety services. I think that's something that I would encourage, dads, listening to the podcast, watching the podcast. There are heaps of services available. You just need to be brave and seek the help.
Because that's a big contributing factor with this. You really do feel like you're the only one going through that, and that if you were to bring it up to anyone else, they would say that you're the problem, as you had already internalized and figured out in your own mind. So, but the reality is that 5% of new fathers in Australia actually go through postnatal depression. So that's quite a lot of people if you actually add up the numbers. But we hear very little talk about it. So obviously it's natural for people to not see other examples of other men speaking about this, and therefore think that it's just them and that they should be ashamed of that. Something must be wrong with them. How did it progress from there when you were at work and you felt like you should have been at home more, but then you didn't want to be at home more either because you were afraid of that and how you felt within that environment? Once you're carrying those feelings around and those thoughts in your mind, it's going to show in your actions and your behavior and the environment that's created. So how did that progress?
I think that was really, when the anxiety and the depression really kicked in. I wasn't enjoying a lot in my life. Just feeling, just feelings of dread and just heightened anxiety and just guilt and maybe a little bit of shame. And I know how dangerous shame can be. But yeah, I think it just sort of escalated quite quickly. There was one night in particular, a few months into post the birth, that I thought I'd actually settled Bub down to sleep, and I was quite elated that I had achieved that milestone, because it was just so incredibly hard to settle Bub without settling her via my wife, through feeding. So yeah, and I placed Bub down, and then within 5 minutes he was just screaming his head off. I just walked in to the room and I was just in a fit of rage, and I picked him up and tried to, settle him again. And then I held him out and screamed my head off at him. And sorry, it is hard to talk about because it was an out of body experience. I remember overhearing, a dog bark, and neighbours, I could hear some murmurings as well. So I must have screamed pretty loud, and it was so out of character because I'm a pretty laid back sort of guy.
Yeah.
And it really was a sort of an out of body experience. And I think why I find it still quite hard to talk about as well is that I could have done anything in that moment. I think there's so many different scenarios that could have played out, and I'm just so grateful that I've still got my family together. I didn't take any actions that would result in that relationship ending. So for me, that was the turning point. My partner basically rushed into the room, took the baby from me, and yeah, I just basically went into the lounge room and just sat, with my face in my hands, and yeah, just feeling really, really distraught. And yeah, I think at that point, that was the time that then I started to talk to my partner about how I was feeling. And it really was the turning point for me. So I just found it amazing that when you're actually really truthful and honest, with those that you love and obviously that you feel comfortable talking to, those kind of shame gremlins, those negative thoughts, they really don't have any sort of space to breed. And yeah, I found that for me, that was the turning point, and I acknowledged, to my partner that I needed to seek help. I went to see a GP, after that time, and spoke about how I was feeling, and they said, I think they did like a questionnaire thing with me and said, based on your, what you've told me, it sounds like you had postnatal depression and anxiety. And did you know that this has, that fathers actually do experience this just like mothers do? Yeah, that was an eye-opener, because I really felt like postnatal depression and anxiety was a mum's thing. I didn't sort of, again, feel like I was entitled to, to be reflecting on my mental health decline because, I didn't feel like it was something that was supposed to impact me. And really at that time, having that validation, I think was really, really helpful because it allowed me to implement some strategies to help me, cope better. And I'm so grateful I was able to come out that other end because, today I'm the father that I've always wanted to be. I think certainly that journey, having gone through that time, I've learned a lot, but I've also learned that it's really important to get help when you need it. Even if you're in doubt, you might not have a diagnosis as such, but just reaching out and tapping into those support networks is so incredibly important.
Absolutely. And how did your partner respond when you finally did share the feelings that you were having? What kind of reaction did you actually get from her, and how did that compare to what you thought you would get in your mind?
I was really in total admiration. And I think that this is a learning lesson for us guys is I think sometimes, we just go, let's get on with it. But I think our partners do, they do want to know what's going on. They do want to know what we're feeling, especially when we're not feeling, well. She was really supportive, and she remains supportive to this day. We have, our children are older now, but 6 and 8. But we've really sort of built, I guess, a foundation of sort of talking through those experiences. And I've learned that, through that experience, that sort of seeking support with the person that you're doing the journey with is so important. As I said earlier, learning also about what they might be going through themselves as well. So I'm so glad that I reached out when I did. Obviously, it would have been much better to do it much earlier. I'm really pleased that she was really open and supportive of how, I guess, where I was at. And she even said to me at the time, she said, well, I need to know that you're well, and I need you to take some steps to look after yourself. You're a really important part of this family. And I think that sort of message is really important. Is, it not only takes a family to raise children, but it takes a village. And I think it's really important, to sort of take that philosophy of no man is an island, because, when it comes to kids, they will find they'll tap into all those insecurities. And I think, having gone through the experience, I feel like I was kind of born again, in a sense, with my infant. And I think that that's kind of where I really started to build that bond. Was we were kind of in the soup together, and we were just, sort of doing life together. And I think it really changed my perspective around the fact that I didn't need to have answers per se myself. There was supports out there. I just needed to learn how to cope in this new relationship dynamic. And I sort of tapped into a lot of things like, listening to calming music. Like I'd have my headphones in as I was kind of going through those screaming sessions at night, and, just small things that can really just help calm that anxiety and get you into a much more mindful headspace, I think is really helpful too.
And at what point did you really start to feel connected to your son and like you'd turned a corner in that respect?
So I think for me, when I started to realise that I could spend, an hour and a half, 2.5 hours, like sometimes the settling sessions were so long, but because I'd kind of gone into those settling sessions with the right attitude, and I know a lot of parents have got reflux, kids with reflux symptoms. I've learnt a lot of stories from talking to other guys about their experiences, and I know that there's some families that do it really, really tough in that space. I think for me, the bond started when my attitude shifted to woe is me to how can we soothe each other, basically, and being really sort of present, with how Bub was reacting. And I think just being really in tune with Bub's responses to different settling techniques as well. And sometimes I just learnt just to persist. I think that that's probably one of the most valuable lessons is, just because, you might have a timeline that you're trying to meet, to juggle life, an infant doesn't, and they often do demand from you. You're all, and sometimes I think the key to settling is actually meeting them on that level and actually going, you know what, I'm going to stay here. We're going to stick tight together until until you're feeling really relaxed.
If you settle the baby and then the baby cries, it doesn't mean you're a failure as a father. Perhaps not taking that so personally, and like you said,
Yeah.
persisting in trying again and not saying, this has happened again, this always happens, therefore I'm incapable of doing it, therefore I'm incapable as a father, and going down that thread and catastrophizing to that extent where it blows up into this massive thing in your mind. And I think it's interesting hearing your story. Very much nothing really changed in the external. It was your attitude shifting, and that was only allowed to happen by you validating your feelings in the first place and saying, I am feeling like this, and then being able to share that. And then that allowed you to start to reframe your attitude around that. And that was really what changed. It wasn't like something all that different happened outside of what was going on in your own mind, which I suppose is quite empowering for people, because we can look at ourselves and reflect and say, I actually have quite a bit of control here. But it's not easy to just switch that on. Like, someone couldn't have said to you, you just change your headset, or you're just not looking at it the right way, which would have been kind of true, but you have to get to that point yourself and go through experiencing those feelings and then be able to open up and go on that journey on your own. But I think other fathers hearing your story, they can reflect on what you've said and those thoughts, and look at themselves and say, how much am I thinking these same things, and how might I be able to react and act differently? And then that would at least help to start that process. I'm also interested, there was a point in which you decided to have a second child, obviously. So were you guys feeling very different by that point, 2 years later, that you wanted to then have another child?
We were apprehensive, but also confident. I think that first journey really sort of taught us a lot about vulnerability and sort of embracing the cards that you dealt with, not trying to, have a fixed mindset, trying to reduce your expectations and sort of go with the flow. And it was so important because our second child had worse reflux than our first. So I think it was a divine way of, teaching us that, hey, this journey and the skills that you've developed, first time around, you're going to need them, again, second time around. So I think, from that perspective, yes, it was really, really hard, but because certainly for me, emotionally, psychologically, I was much sort of better prepared in sort of navigating that sort of uncertain world with the screaming and the unsettlement. So, and I knew that I had this confidence that I had some techniques and some coping strategies for myself that I could utilize. And I did. I found the bonding with our second so much faster as well. So yeah, it was definitely challenging. Our infant journey with our children was challenging. But yeah, I'm really pleased, as I said before, of the journey that I've gone through personally, because I feel like I'm a stronger man. I'm the father that I've always wanted to be as well. So
you went from being someone who felt the way you felt having one child to then having two children in the house, but felt a whole lot better about the whole situation, which I imagine you couldn't have thought possible earlier. Like, when you only had one child, the thought of having two would have been enough to break you. But actually, after that time passed and things changed and your attitude changed, that became very different. So if you currently have one child and you're experiencing postnatal depression, or you're struggling and you think, imagine having two, or this isn't ever going to get better, that's not the case.
Absolutely. I think that's such a key message, and a great point, Callum, is that I think that there is that sense, that it can be really overwhelming, and you can question, whether you've got the coping strategies. But I find as human beings, like we're such a resilient, we're such a resilient being, really. And I think we can deal with stuff. Often we need to recognize that we do need supports. There's no shame in asking for help, because, it's, as I said before, often takes a village to raise children. And I'm so grateful because, I've got, friends and family that we can call on as well. Even if I didn't, like the services that Gidget Foundation provide, the telehealth services that Panda provide, like they're just such incredible, extra support for when you're just feeling overwhelmed and need some guidance. And often there's some really good help out there. Like I started a reflux dads group, not too long after the birth of our second, because I was interested. I was interested to see whether there are other dads that had experienced the same things. And what I sort of learned in those peer groups, and I know Gidget provide a Gidget virtual village for dads as well through Facebook. So no sort of face-to-face meetings, but what I found with that experience was you're not alone. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that I've learned is while I was thinking, for that time after the birth of our first, that I was alone and, no one else, would fail this badly, I've learned, that it is quite common. And as you said, the statistics, show that it's quite common. So, I think that, certainly from my experience, is that, the key message is that you're not alone. And I guess from that experience, you have the opportunity, I guess, to seek support. Everyone's situation will be different, but I think certainly from my experience, there's a lot of common themes, sharing your stories. And as I said, the power of sharing the story is really helpful. It's quite therapeutic as well. So,
and a reason for men to reach out and seek that support is actually it will deliver the result that you're after, because in your case, you're worried about failing as a man, not being able to be an effective partner and father, and actually not reaching out for help, not being vulnerable, not talking about it is resulting in exactly what you don't want to happen. And the way to move forward is to actually speak about those things. And that's going to, in a practical sense, allow you to function a lot more effectively, which men love. We want to function as effectively as possible, and we're embarrassed when we feel like we're not. And the way out of that is actually to confront that and say, I can't do this all on my own. And you should do that for you and for your family, because you're going to be much more useful if you're able to accept that, bite the bullet, and then talk about it, even though that feels really uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you feel about being a dad now that your children are older?
I'm so proud of them, just seeing these lives develop, seeing them hit milestones, with their education and their social skill development, their, physical coordination. It's just, you feel like you're just so blessed, to have these little humans growing up. And I still feel like, myself, I'm growing up still, so it's such an honor to be able to, to parent these little ones, grow up to, be the adults, that you want them to be. There's just no better feeling than sort of celebrating, the birthdays and their little achievements at school. And it's such a rewarding experience.
Well, I think to hear from where you've come from to where you are now, and how big of a change there's been in that time, and how blessed you feel now and how happy you are about your current reality is very reassuring for any other young dads that are watching this or listening to this, and to see that, things can change in quite a significant way, and you just need to perhaps think a bit differently and go about it a bit differently if it's not working the way that you have been doing things this far. And you're a really good example that it can get better. And thank you for wanting to come on and share that and let other people know that, because it's something that's just not talked about very much, but it is affecting a lot of people. So it takes people to step up and let each other know that this stuff's normal and there's a way through it. So thank you.
My pleasure, Callum. Yeah, I think I think that's a key message is that it will get better. And I mean, the postnatal depression, anxiety specialists in this area, experts in this area will say that it is a temporary condition. So, recovery is inevitable, but you just need to seek the right supports. And I think that I just got a lot of value in the peer support group space, and just talking to other guys, about the experience. I think it's just really, really helpful.
That's it for this episode. If you're getting some value out of the show, please help us out with a quick rate and review on Apple Podcasts. Everything we do is recorded in video, so follow Youngblood Men's Mental Health on Instagram and Facebook and Youngblood Mental Health on TikTok. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and please leave us a comment or send us a message if these stories resonate. We'd love to hear from you. You can sign up to our e-news through our website, youngbloodmedia.com.au. And most importantly, please share the podcast with anyone in your life who might need it. We're all about reaching as many people as we can. This is Youngblood. Thanks for being part of the mission. Catch you next time.